You are one of my favorite people to listen to. Every time you have a podcast, I always consume it because you have a way of humbling people about life and investing that I find nobody else has. And it comes across every single time that you want people to make it down the slope in life. And the reason I say slope is because you have this perfect analogy about skiing and recently hearing about ergodicity. Could you talk to the audience about navigating the slope of life and what is ergodicity?
Oh, that's wow. Yeah. So first of all, Jeremy, it's great to have you here in Zurich. Um, you're a special person, and I love you. We were just talking about you being an introvert, and I feel like I'm an introvert. But I'm really impressed with your approach to life. So I think that. So why is this relevant to the audience? Is that for some reason I've managed to attract people like Jeremy into my life, and that reinforces some things that I want to have reinforced. So you're a part of the flywheel, in case you didn't realize.
I'm honored.
Yeah, and it's very kind of you to flatter me, and I love responding to people when I say, talk to my wife. I have plenty of reasons to be humble, but I would say that Laurie, my wife, I was lucky enough to be wise enough to understand that I needed to marry somebody who didn't take my BS. And so I think that a huge part of who I am, and I've been married now 20 years plus, is that I have a wife who don't take my BS. She don't stand for it. So it's not something that happened on its own. To the extent that I have that humility, it happened because I have a wife, and my children learn from my wife, so they don't take my BS. And obviously, if you live a life in the markets have a way of humbling you as well. But I certainly think that family setting, and it was a selection that I made, and it's an example of you make your bed and then you sleep in it. You create your environment, then your environment shapes you. I'm really grateful I had the wisdom to pick somebody like that to marry, who was willing to stand up to me and stand against me. So, and now on to your question, which is, you asked me to talk about ergodicity, and you asked me to talk about the analogy of skiing. So the idea of ergodicity for me originated with somebody called Ole Peters, who's a mathematician working at the London Mathematical Institute. And the concept of ergodicity actually applies in its original form to gases. And a gas is ergodic, if I'm not mistaken. If you can take one small sample of the gas, so if you have a room full of gas, if you take 1 cubic centimeter of gas somewhere in the room, is that representative of all the gas in the room or not? So why the hell does this apply to investing and economics? And I would tell you that Ole Peters is a very capable mathematician, and I can't claim to understand the mathematics of some of the more extensive work on ergodicity, although I think I understood the basic stuff. The guy who really opened it up for me and enabled me to talk about it in verbal terms is somebody called Luca Dell'Anna, who's based in Turin, and he's written a book on ergodicity, and he's written a book without any formula in it. And he has a capacity to talk in terms of analogies. And so I'm going to now go into the analogy that you gave of the ski race. And before I get there, I'll just talk in terms of the mathematics, and then we'll get to the simple version. So imagine that we can flip a coin, and if it lands heads, and I need to remember the ratios to get this correct. If you get I want to refer to it. It should be able to come up to me right away. But without going into the specific arithmetic, we're talking about expected value. And so if you get tails, you're down by 50%. You lose 50 cents. And if you get heads, you get 50 cents. So you're up by 50 cents. So the game is that you bet $1 and there's a coin flip, and it's a fair coin. There's no kind of bias in the coin. And if it lands heads, it's plus 50%. And if it lands tails, it's down 40%. So on $1, if you want to calculate the expected value, plus 50%, let me just double check the numbers, plus 50%, you'd be $1.50. And half of that is 75 cents. And if you're down 40%, then you're down to 0.6, and half of that is 0.3. And you add to get the expected value of that bet, you add the two sides of the possible outcomes. So there's the upside and the downside. The upside is 75 and the downside is 30. And so you add those together, you get $1.05. And so that has a positive expected value. And really genuinely, I don't know that you've done an MBA, we spent time at business school doing expected value calculations. And so you would imagine that if the expected value is positive, as it is in that case, that's a bet that you want to take all day long. And that would be true if the system is ergodic, but if it's not, you'd be led to ruin, meaning that you can lose all your money if you play that repeated game. And that for me was just astounding, because it's not what I'd learned at business school. And so I went and built a spreadsheet where I kind of tested this out. And I played the repeated game, and I saw how the road to ruin happens. And just because I double checked it on the website, and I urge people to look at it. So this is the game played repeatedly, the $1, flip a coin, plus or minus, and this is like sort of 750 games, 1,000 games, and you can see that the net worth of the person trends towards zero. And I don't know if you can see that, but obviously somebody can look it up on the website. That's ergodicity economics. You need to make a difference between the arithmetic mean and the geometric mean. And there are circumstances in which the arithmetic mean and the geometric mean are the same, circumstances in which they're not. With the coin toss, what's going on is, if we imagine 1,000 individuals, and ideally 10,000 individuals, and they're all playing the game of the coin toss, you can imagine that there will be one extraordinarily lucky individual that comes up heads, 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 heads. So there'll be plus 50% every time, and they'll just keep going up. And that will turn into, we know what plus 50% over many, many times will do. That turns into a ridiculous amount of money. So everybody wants to be that person. But the number of people who get that kind of outcome is a minuscule proportion of the 1,000 or 10,000 samples that you have. In the overwhelming proportion of all the other possible outcomes of series of heads, tails, you get a number where, so next time around, I'm not working, if I get a negative result, I'm not working with $1.05, $1.50, I'm working with 60 cents. And that's 60 cents, so I have less capital to work with. So that was astounding to me. It shows that a positive expected value game, which has the wrong characteristics, if played repeatedly, can lead you to ruin. That blew my mind. So if somebody didn't understand that, and just anybody wants to, I came back or walked into my office and said, people, I've had a sort of eye-opening moment. And they're like, Guy, and let me just be clear, I think I'm capable of it. I wish I'd studied the mathematics to be able to be facile with the mathematics. I'm not. So they're like, you're full of shit, Guy, and we don't understand what you're talking about. And I'm trying to explain it to them in those terms, and they're like, we don't understand what you're talking about. And then I come across Luca Delana, and he gives me a way to explain it far more simply, and it's written up in his book, Ergodicity, which is very, very worth reading. And so we're going to go to the ski analogy. If none of what I made sense, none of what I said made sense, we can now go to a skiing analogy. So, and there are a set of ratios for this to work in the skiing analogy, and I'm not going to try and look them up right now, but Imagine that you're a professional skier. We're in the mountains here, and I love skiing, so that's not a terrible thing. And there's a season of 10 races, and the goal is to win the season, to be the best skier over the whole season. And one of the variables that's under the control of the skier is how aggressively the skier skis. And we're talking about downhill racing. So the name of the game is point your hiz down the hill and ski as fast as you can to the bottom and get the best possible time. And so the skier can slow himself down, but then he's less likely to win the race, but he's also less likely to get injuries. And in terms of the probabilities, and again, I refer you to Luca's work or Luca's write-up of this. The skier, it's remarkable how conservatively you have to ski in order to have the highest chance of winning the season. Because even with a relatively low risk of an injury, the problem with an injury is that if you don't make it past race 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, you can't finish the season. And then you're out of the game, and then you definitely have not won the season. And so there is a perspective difference. So within the race, the skier feels the pressure to ski as fast as they possibly can because they feel like that's what's going to win them the season. But very, very likely the skier is taking an undue risk with the risk of injury and pushing that too much such that he's going to end up getting knocked out of the game. And Luca, with his wonderful way with English, which is not even his mother tongue, he says, future gains won't recover present losses. So, if you take the previous coin toss analogy, you've lost the opportunity to work with the 40 cents that you've lost in round 2. And if you get another tails, now you've lost more opportunity to work with your capital, and it's a road to ruin, even though if you could stay in the game long enough, you would eventually get there. But you can't stay in the game long enough, and the injury is an obvious example of that. So the person who wins the season is not the fastest skier. It's the fastest skier who does not get injured. And so, if I was a skiing coach, I would certainly spend time explaining this to people. And forgive me, everyone, there's some simple maths that will demonstrate this to you, and it's the table in Luca's book. And I'd spend time with the skiers helping them to understand that, because it's just really, really important. And so where does this apply before we get to investing? So when I explain this to some mathematician friends who spend their whole lives in mathematics, they're like, oh, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? So there are people who say, dude, this is obvious. What's your freaking, don't get so excited. For me, it wasn't obvious. So I want to go to another example of
Just before you do that, actually, the fact that you are willing to acknowledge that versus and this whole conversation, I just really want to cover all the ways people will break their legs on the slope. And so I actually worry about the intellects who say it's obvious, because even if you take someone like easier said than done, where and clearly for people who will watch how you go through your life, a day in the office tour that we just filmed, is you're constantly setting up these things so you don't fool yourself, and people say easier said than done. And you take someone like Jesse Livermore, who was one of the most successful traders of all time, who said even make money while sitting, not by trading. And he lost his fortune and committed suicide. So here's one of who you would call a genius, and clearly easier said than done. So I just really want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and so I guess so Charlie Munger, I mean, you could summarize all of ergodicity standing on one leg by saying, all I want to know is where I'm going to die so that I don't go there. What does that mean? I'm Kobe Bryant, and it's very convenient for me to take a helicopter I'm a very rich guy, to take a helicopter to my basketball practice. And during bad weather, there's a small but non-zero chance that you have a hard landing and possibly people die because it's very, very hard to orientate the helicopter in bad weather, low visibility. And Kobe Bryant makes the decision that he's always going to fly to basketball practice using the helicopter. So you have a situation where a one-off, very low risk of something happening, it's real, but you do it once, then you have that very, very low risk. But if you do that thing every single day, sooner or later that risk becomes an 100% certainty. And so there's the difference in perspective for Kobe Bryant, and he made that mental error and he paid for it with his life. Yes, on each individual helicopter ride, the risk of a hard landing in bad weather is extremely small. If every now and then you decide to take that risk, that's not the end of the world, and it is a very, very small risk. If you do it repeatedly, you know, if I'm somebody who's extremely concerned about nuclear weapon detonating in New York City, and of all the cities in the world, New York City is the most likely to have a dirty bomb or nuclear weapon that some terrorist decides to detonate at some point. Or I'm very worried about being caught in an earthquake in California. Or if I'm very concerned about being caught in the middle of missiles being fired at Tel Aviv in Israel. So if I go to Tel Aviv for a 4 or 5 day period, or if I go to LA, or if I go to New York, the probability that particular event happening while I'm there is a very, very small risk. If I live there, it's close to 100%. And so there's an example of where, in Kobe Bryant's case, he paid for that risk. He paid for that misunderstanding of the different perspectives on risk. On an individual basis, it's extremely small. Yeah, but on a repeated basis, if you play the repeated game, it's practically 100%. And, you know, so what you can't do in the case of the helicopter ride, you can't divide yourself into 1,000 people and say, well, it's okay, because in this number of helicopter rides, I survive. Because you need to know that the one that you're on. So there's a difference between playing the game sequentially and dividing yourself up into 1,000 people and having each of you play that game, and you can only need one of them to succeed. So this idea of, you know, there are some kinds of games like flying helicopters in bad weather where you don't want to pay with your life, so you have to succeed in all the versions of the world where it can possibly come out, and your expected value is not the right way to look at it. I found this extraordinarily powerful. When it comes to investing, there are plenty of bets that have a positive expected value, but if you take them repeatedly with a significant proportion of your net worth, you will be led to ruin. The only way you can possibly take them repeatedly is to do this idea of dividing your portfolio into many different buckets and do it with a small enough number of buckets so that the amount that you've bet is not fatal when you lose it, and you can come back and rebet again. And so it's extremely, extremely important to figure out what kind of investment idea one's looking at. Is it an idea like the Kobe Bryant idea, where you know, mistakes could be fatal, or sometimes people call those binary outcomes, or is it an example which is far more forgiving of mistakes? And I took the decision once I understood this, that I only really wanted to be invested in situations which were not binary, where no matter, the only question is, how much money do I make, is never a question of, if I lose, if it comes out tails, I don't lose much. I don't want to lose at all, in a way. Yeah, I guess there you have it. I guess the ways in which you can break your leg is a... So I think that what you're picking up on is elements of my annual letter to investors, where survival is so important. So in the case of, it's not just whether you win the competition. In fact, I think what I wrote is, survival is everything. Because if you survive, that's all actually you need to do, because there are so many ways you can fail. And perhaps another way of describing that is something that somebody put in front of me. It's written by somebody. Life, in a way, so many aspects of life are not a winner's game, it's a loser's game. So the analogy is to tennis. Up to a certain level of tennis, the way you win tennis is not make any mistakes. If you just pop the ball back to your opponent, manage to hit the ball into the court, your opponent will make a mistake sooner or later. And if you can just consistently return the ball into the court, you don't have to hit that killer shot, that killer slam, that ace serve. And so that's a loser's game. The people who win are just the people who are consistently able to return the ball. And the people who try and smash the ball are going to lose because they're going to keep making unforced errors. And so it turns out that just in a way in investing, making unforced errors is the way to survive, actually. And many people end up losing money, like Jesse Livermore, because he made unforced errors. He didn't. Actually, I think that quite possibly, I read that book a long time ago, he did not have that distinction in his mind. If he had that distinction, that simple distinction, he may well have been far more able to manage his desire, because he would have understood, hey, this isn't a non-ergodic bet, so I cannot do it with a lot of money. And actually, it's a checklist item for me. Is this ergodic or non-ergodic? An example of an ergodic bet would be, and I love using this example, is Nestle. So, the only question is, how much does Nestle grow into the future? There's no doubt that people are going to be consuming more of their products. Are they going to grow by 3% real internal growth, 2%, 1%, 5%? That is a question. But the products that they have, the basic food products, what we know about human consumption patterns, what we see the business doing, and so then the only question is, how much do they grow and how much am I paying for it? And if you don't pay too much for the growth, then the probability that you're going to lose money, you don't know if you're going to make, a 12% return, a 15% return, an 8% return. But there's a very, very different example to buying a knockout option, where you put your money down, and if the state of the world is one, you win a lot of money. If the state of the world is the other, you lose everything. And many. So take, for example, a company that, and this has happened to me in my portfolio, where when I invested in the company, it wasn't very leveraged, and leverage built up, and really the management didn't pay attention to it. So it was an ergodic bet when I first invested, and then over time it changed into a different kind of bet, and so just paying attention to that and being aware of it can make an enormous difference. Yeah.
Well, and one of my favorite books is What I Learned Investing about Darwin. Yeah. And yeah, the survival of I've heard you once say how you have in your cave, you have berries and nuts at the back of the cave. Yeah. And that dichotomy of then going out to hunt for fresh meat. But how this ties into the skiing down the hill is if you go out every time to go hunt fresh meat, the saber-toothed tiger will get you eventually. And so I know that dichotomy of you've been outperforming the S&P 500, but have you gotten maybe the higher returns that you would have dreamed of when you first started this? I know that dichotomy. And even when I'm trying to think about me going into investing, how much I'm truly starting to really appreciate that, instead of thinking, just generate 20% rate of return without taking in the factor of, how important it is for survival and to have nuts and berries in the back of the cave.
Yeah, I mean, so two places I want to go with that question. One is what is Prahlad Prasad's book? Is Prahlad Prasad's book, Investing Like Darwin. I'll go into that set of ideas because I think that that's one of the most original books that I've read, and he did a phenomenal job of taking investing and thinking about investing into an area which is extremely powerful, valuable, and useful. But before we go there, I want to address your aspects of the cave, and I think that something that you may not be aware of, Jeremy, is that you need you're in a different place to me. I'm about to turn, well, I'm 58, so shortly I'll be 60. I can think that, certainly more than half of my life is behind me, possibly more, probably more. I don't think I'll live to 120. And so, and it also depends on whether I'm investing my own savings and whether I'm investing other people's money and what their time horizon is. But you're at the closer to the beginning of your life, and you have a far longer time horizon. So the earlier you are in life, you should be able to recover from your risks. So I'm not encouraging you to go hang gliding or to go wingsuit jumping or any of those things. But I think that with investing, to take higher risks now is probably a good thing to do, provided you can recover from them. And so I think that as I grow older, I have less opportunity to recover from big mistakes. But I think the rational thing for somebody your age is to take more risks, but to take them in a recoverable way. What do I mean by that? Somebody I know he had an exit from a very successful exit in an artificial intelligence company, and he now wants to buy a business, and he's moved back to Europe and is looking for a business to buy. And learning from Berkshire Hathaway, one of the things that I shared with him to do was divide the pot of money you have to invest in a business into 5, ideally 10 different shots. What am I trying to say? Ideally, don't assume that the first business you buy will be a success. Set yourself up that you can, if it works, that's great. And if it doesn't, you can go on to number 2, number 3. Maybe you can pursue some of them in parallel. Eventually, you'll get to one that succeeds, but you don't want the first one to take you out and prevent you from coming back from doing numbers 2, 3, and 4. And so I think that in an optimal way, if I were in your shoes, the person I am today, I would be taking, bets with, bets that have very high upside, don't necessarily have as high a probability of working out as I would like. But the key is to be able to come back and do at least 10 or 20 or 30 of them, so that the law of large numbers, and this is something that actually Luca Delana talks about as well, be in the game long enough for the game law of large numbers to work for you. But actually, having said that, in your specific case, and I'm sure there are many people like this, the only caveat to that is that you don't ever want to be in a situation where, assume the first 3 bets you make don't work out. So you need to make them in such a way that whatever happens with those 3 bets, you're not discouraged from making the 4th one, and the 5th one, and the 8th one, and the 10th one, and the 12th one. So Berkshire Hathaway is incredibly structured because it's just got this fount of cash that keeps coming up. And so every year I think they produce $100 million a week these days. So, and in my case, somebody like you has high current earnings. So you, through that current earnings, have high cash every year, hopefully, that you're not spending on your life, that you can reinvest. And so I don't know that my bets this year will work out. Another way to look at that, and it's a wonderful analogy, is it's a vineyard. And every year you're going to plant a new row of vines, and you're going to be planting vines for the rest of your life. Sometimes the wines will come out good. Sometimes the harvest will be spoiled. It's not entirely under your control. So leave that aside and go to the second point that I heard you make before I come back to you, which is Pulak Prasad's book, What I Learned from Darwin About Investing. And he took a really, really unusual and interesting take on the way evolution happens. And what Pulak Prasad pointed out from the study of evolution and the evolutionary record is that evolution doesn't happen in a consistent manner. It happens in punctuated periods. There are periods of seeing through the geological history where fauna and flora on planet Earth were evolving very quickly, new species being created very rapidly, and then periods of stasis where not much happens. And those periods can last an extremely long time. and then you get, an asteroid that hits the Earth, and you have a collapse of a whole bunch of species, and then suddenly rapid development. And so one of the two takeaways for me. One is so the analogy to businesses, there are businesses that are in stasis. They're not evolving. If you take the analogy of a business being a species, and the structure of the industry and the structure of the profits and the costs is stable over a long period of time. And then there are businesses where things are changing very, very rapidly. And so actually look for businesses where, it's like a species that is not changing very much and doesn't have to change very much. And some of them are not very profitable, some of them are extremely profitable. And unfortunately, so many of them come back to well-known industries that we all know. In this case, I think that he uses the example of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, 7-Up. That's a very, very stable structure, a very stable set of economic returns and moats that have endured for probably the best part of 100 years, which is really, really fascinating. The power of thinking by analogy is, so analogies are extremely powerful. They can also mislead us. So as we think like that, we have to say, I'm using a model of the world. I don't fully understand everything about evolution. I'm applying that model of evolution to investing. Be aware that that model might not be an appropriate model. So have some humility about the tool that I'm using, or the framework that I'm using, to try and understand the world. Realize the world might be different to the framework I'm using. Never confuse. I pulled out that book by Alan Greenspan, The Map and the Territory. Never confuse the map for the territory. The map is the idea you have in your mind of the way the world works. The territory may be different, and always be clear. So what I'm saying is just be aware that's a model of the world, it's not how the world actually works. And forgive me, because this just harks back to the tour. Do you see how I remembered that map and the territory, and I brought that relevant and brought in Alan Greenspan because I'd pulled the book off the shelf. Simple as that, Yeah. It's okay to flip through books,
Yeah, no, that is very powerful, and I have to remind myself about that, because I typically speak in analogies with people, and so
that's fine. That's a sign of a highly intelligent, capable mind. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's great. But just be aware of the analogies.
Yeah. Yeah, even in his book, where he talks about the silver foxes and how they were bred in Russia. There was some laboratory going on, and I think by the 20th generation, they were just looking for silver foxes that were more docile, and they were just training them to be more docile. And then by the 20th generation, I think, I might be wrong about the number of generations, they started to wag their tails. Their eyes got cuter, their nose got smaller. And when I read that chapter, I instantly thought about, the environment that we are conditioned in and set up, and you walking us through your library tour, you moving to Zurich, how you have set up a condition. I know when looking for companies to not evolve per se, but also putting yourself in the condition to evolve or not evolve. Because you also said New York, it might be harder for some people to actually be a successful investor because they might have to be fighting those conditions of New York that are subconsciously evolving them. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, what comes up for me when you say that is we shape our environment and then it shapes us. We pick our environment and then it shapes us. I think that, at the time that we lived in New York, some deep force in me made me decide, and we took the decision together, but I think that my wife Laurie would agree with me that I was leading that decision to move to Zurich, and I instinctively sensed that something was right in the environment in Zurich for me, and that's been extended through the office that you've seen. There are also enormous disadvantages to being in Zurich. I understand American companies the best. That's because I spend a large part of my life there. It's also because they're the easiest to understand, and it's the most incredible place to invest and make money. and I'm far away from the United States. Unless I want to be on a plane every week to the US, I live here, I don't live there. So if I wanted to go and do due diligence on boat manufacturers, leisure boat manufacturers that are based in the US, I got to fly over there, and I'm less likely to do that due diligence because I don't want to be in a plane all the time. There's also something that happened to me here in Zurich, for your interest. After I came here, I got regulated, and I would have been regulated in the US by the SEC. Here I'm regulated by FINMA, but that was a significant change in my environment that I didn't choose, that was kind of brutal and difficult for me to adjust to. And I've first of all, I've adjusted to it. Second of all, I think I've found ways to use it to my benefit and to the benefit of our business and our investors. But it's not like everything's perfect over here. And I think that, and there are, my daughter, last time I spoke to her, doesn't like Zurich very much because she finds it boring and people think in a very structured way. And I like that because it creates certainty for my erratic mind, and I need hard walls to bounce off, and Zurich gives me hard walls. New York City is a city of possibility. In a way, Zurich is a city of certainty and reliability. So somebody who wants to get lucky in life, you're going to be far better off in New York. For me, but having said that, many Swiss people feel constrained in Zurich, and they feel far happier in a place like London or New York, and there's far more free, open thinkers, if you like. And so there is a certain cost to being here as well. I think that the benefit to me outweighs the cost, but I just think that I want to share with you that it's not as if there's any perfect place. There's no perfect place. And to the degree that I think that where I come out now, which is 180 degrees opposed to what I wrote in the book, and in a way 180 degrees opposed to sort of this office tour that we did. Where I come from right now, I think it's really beautiful to be close to people that you love and family, and those the reasons why they end up the way where they are all sorts of multifarious. And maybe a better approach, if I was starting again, is to find a way to be close to family and then construct the environment in that environment, whether that's New York City or St. Louis, Missouri, or Tokyo, Japan, or wherever it is. But that closeness to hearth and home is more important than any of those things. And what I said at the end of the interview, which I think is really, really important, is it's the people, it's not the physical environment. It took me a long time to really realize. So, but I think, and then I'll give you back the mic. I think that what you would say back to me, of course you're here, you can say it to me, but I'll have a go at this, is yes, fine, it's the people and we can talk about the people, but structuring wherever you are, whether in New York, Missouri, Tokyo, or Zurich, you can still structure your physical environment in a way that supports it. And those are small actions that one can take, and one should definitely take them, if you like. I'll share one additional thought that I think is helpful. So, and I think that this maybe, so if you're looking to build, so I'm trying to answer, I'm realizing there's a question behind all of your questions. And the question is, I would put it this way, is for somebody who's either already an investor, who's starting to invest, wants to be a successful investor, is, what do I do, and where do I start, and how do I start, and how do I avoid the big mistakes, and how do I avoid ruin, how do I avoid Kobe Bryant? And so one thing is, make a move, keep making moves, make moves that are small enough that if they turn out to be mistakes, there's the opportunity to learn. And every person needs to judge that for themselves. Don't take big moves. If in doubt, take smaller, then do less. If you think that climbing that mountain might kill you, then climb a hill. Climb a smaller hill, It's about climbing. It's not about climbing the tallest mountain. It's not about the amount of money you invest. If never invest more than 10%, maybe it's 5% or 1% of your portfolio, or 0.5%. That's okay, but make a move, and then learn from it. So you need to be making the moves, But then the next point was the most critical one, which I had in my mind, and it just went out of my mind, but it's going to come back to me very, very soon. Don't think that insignificant moves don't matter. And I would argue, so I make an investment move, make a decision to buy office furniture, I make a decision to hire somebody, whatever it is, time to get up in the morning, what alarm clock. Think of it in terms of the material practical impact, and then think of it as also being a way to shape one's environment. So I think that what I'm picking up on in you is that what you're noticing is that things that are relatively insignificant that I've done that were perhaps surprising to you because they seem so small and insignificant, but Guy still pays attention to them. And so, the beginning of climbing Mount Everest is to take one small step in the right direction, and those small steps really make a difference. Where something is on your desk, the first thing I pick up in the morning. I have a simple rule that has been working really well for me. At some point in the evening, I force myself to switch over from reading on a computer to reading paper. And then I've given myself, once the light's out, I'm allowed to open the Kindle. That's it. And then what I'm trying to do in the morning is make the first thing I touch paper, not a device, for example. And so it's a very, very tiny thing. It's a very, very subtle change. But those subtle changes, like drops of water onto a stone, it can cut a huge, huge hole in it if you do it for long enough. And those things build up over time. So do those things. If you need to wake up in the morning, use an alarm, But then think of so this is something that I know that Warren Buffett does. If I do this thing repeatedly for the rest of my life, will my outcomes be better or worse? And from my observations of Warren, he never does things where it's short-term expedient, but if you do it for the rest of your life, could lead to a bad outcome. So, I just get drunk once every now and then with friends. No, don't ever get drunk with friends, I'll just this once fly the helicopter in the bad weather. No, don't ever fly the helicopter in the bad weather. Wait until the two things come together, the short-term expediency and the long-term consequences of doing it repeatedly over many, many times, and then do it, So what happens if every night I switch off my laptop at a certain time and I only allow myself to read paper? That's a good thing. And actually, it'll help me to get to bed on time. So that's kind of an obvious choice. And there are many, many other things like that. And so I think that one of the places where I fail in that is that's a very easy way to help get to the answer of no. If I accept this for expedience because I just want to do it, but if I were to do it repeatedly, take that extra appointment, I don't know, if I were to do that repeatedly, where do I end up? I don't end up in a good place. I'm not even going to do it this once, even though saying no to it this time is difficult. And don't be afraid. Well, don't be afraid to make a move on the one side, and don't feel like a tiny move is not worth it. It's too insignificant. A tiny move is a step, and it has consequences and gets built on. So, I'm thinking of a movie. It's one of these Holocaust movies. I don't remember the name. And there's one of these camps, and the guard says these awful words. He says, first of all, you kill one, and then once you kill one, it becomes easier to kill more and more and more. That's a very morbid way of looking at it, but that's also true on the positive side as well. So small steps are okay. Don't have an inner voice that says, oh, this is ridiculous. This is so small, it's insignificant. No, that voice should be banished. I got switched on to this by Anthony Robbins, and I know that many people, he's a complicated figure, but everybody who's achieved anything significant in life is a complicated figure. We're complicated people. People have upsides and downsides. Tony Robbins is no different. Is he a perfect human being? No. but he's taught me an enormous amount. So I say all of that because I've mentioned Tony Robbins to somebody and they're like, oh my God. And I don't want you to we should never allow somebody's distasteful qualities to blot out what is good and what can be learned. So what did I learn from Anthony Robbins? From listening to his, it was cassette tapes at the time, I believe, this concept of the inner voice. And we all have an inner voice inside of us that's talking to us. Not just the schizophrenics, who certainly have voices, sometimes multiple voices, but the inner voice is, I don't know, maybe Freud would call it the superego. It's running constant commentary on what we're doing. And we've all met, sort of like narcissists who have an inner voice that think that every single damn thing they do is great, And those people are probably far more rare, but many of us, all of us have experienced life with the inner voice that's saying, you f***ing idiot. Did you really do that? Oh my God, like not even a loser would do that kind of thing. So why do I bring it up? The first thing is to become aware that we all have that inner voice and to become aware of what it's saying. What is that inner voice saying? And be aware of what events in our life change the tone of that inner voice, change what that inner voice is saying. We've all, hopefully, all of us listening to this, have experienced the thing that happened to us that we did. We were like, I'm fucking awesome. That's amazing. I fucking did that. So that's one inner voice. And then there's another inner voice that says, you fucking loser, you idiot. You fucking idiot. So that inner voice, first of all, it's there. Listen to it. Learn to recognize it, learn it's there. Then, this is what Anthony Robbins taught me. I can take control of that inner voice. That inner voice is not like the weather that I just have to be, that inner voice is not some random thing that reacts to the world. I can actually take the tone of that inner voice, I can take what it says, and I can make it say different things. And that's why Anthony Robbins talks about personal power. That is power, the ability to take control of that voice. And so in a way, what I'm saying to you is, be aware of what that voice is saying and realize, hey, look, if the inner voice is saying you're f***ing awesome, go do it again, that might be just what you need to hear. So many times in life, it's not the inner voice is wrong. The inner voice may be 100% right. There are times in life, possibly many times in life, when the inner voice is completely and utterly wrong. And different people, different personalities. So I think for much of my life, I had an anxious personality. So the inner voice was always worrying, And so another way to see it is that inner voice, that worrying voice is potentially very, very valuable in certain circumstances. But learn how to turn the volume up and down. And learn to know when it's prudent to turn that volume up, and learn when it's prudent to turn that volume down. I did something that potentially is a Kobe Bryant thing. We had a very nice meal, and suddenly at the end of the meal, we'd had some wine. My wife didn't want to drive. So this happened to me about a week or two ago. And what I did was, I just said, oh, that's fine. I'm happy to drive. I need to sit here for an hour and drink water before I drive because I've had a couple of glasses of wine. So I just sat there. That would be the non-Kobe Bryant way of doing things. But this time, I don't remember exactly why. I found myself having to and wanting to drive. I don't know if I was over the limit, but I certainly wasn't 100% sure that I wasn't over the limit. And so, I just made sure that I drove ultra carefully and slowly and told my wife, please pay close attention to me and point everything out to me. I'm driving potentially in, not in the safest possible state that I can be. So what I did was, in that case, I turned up the anxiety. So I turned up an accident's around the corner any moment, any moment, any moment. Drive as if an accident's about to happen. So, one of the things, the effects of alcohol is that it makes you feel overly confident in yourself. And so I was aware of that, and I turned up, I did the opposite. and said, you know, you have slow reaction times. You have slow reaction times. Be ultra careful. Be ultra careful. Be ultra careful. So those are dials that we can use. That's really, I learned he's incredible. Yeah. Well, that learning was incredible.
Yeah, I think what you caught on about the inner voice, and also my underlining questions. You caught me there on what I'm speaking to about, because I know even my fiance says I worry too much about everything. And operating from a position of power and not scarcity is the hardest thing I think to overcome, and which is why, I really admire, looking up to you and how you operate sometimes in a position of power.
So I have plenty of experience around anxiety, and so, I haven't met your fiance, but here's what I want to say to both of you in a way is, so if I could put words into your fiance's, tell me her name.
Anissa.
Anissa, first of all, anxiety is neither good nor bad. It's an emotion. It's a survival emotion. It's very powerful, so what I'd want to do is modulate her language, not to say, and ultimately your language is not to say you have too much anxiety or you're just too anxious the whole time. It's like, wow, you have a really powerful, you're deeply connected to the emotion of anxiety, and that's a really valuable emotion to have. Let's see how we can use that effectively. Let's see how you can use that effectively. Let's have a conversation. It's a fun dinner conversation. When has your anxiety helped you? I'm no doubt that it's been extraordinarily helpful in all sorts of things. It's got you where you are in a way. Let's see where it's not been helpful. And so let's try and understand when you should lean into your anxiety and actually amplify it, and when actually you want to kind of tone it down, and and it's sort of like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Let me double check. Hey, Anissa, do you think there's a time when I need to turn the volume up on this or turn it down? So it becomes a much more nuanced conversation. Than I'll give you an example from. This is so I had a business partner and my wife is deeply suspicious of her. So I could have said to my wife, "Oh, you're just very suspicious. You're too suspicious," in a way, to analogize. And I said something different. I said, I know that there's no person who loves me more, and that you want to protect me, and obviously you want to protect our family, and you don't want to see this come into a negative place. I'm deeply grateful for that, and I know that the emotion that you're feeling is valuable. And so now I want to find a way, we need to find a way to make it useful to us. We need to find a way, so in some cases, the suspicion might be, actually, you have a great point, I should structure this business relationship differently. In other cases might be, you're suspicious, and I think that the conclusion is that this person is the wrong person to deal with in my life. So do you see how there's a kind of, if you say, oh, you're just a suspicious bastard, that becomes the inner voice that is just like, is not productive. And it's fascinating how a modulation of how you talk about it can change whether the emotion. So this is all, Gadsad, evolutionary psychology, and there's a book. It's like a name like Panksepp. And it's called The Archaeology of Emotions. And so we evolved as, Lucy at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania was 2 million years ago. She was walking on 2 feet. So we've been bipedal for 2 million years. By contrast, we've had writing, I think, for less than 10,000 years. Even before we see animals have emotions, dogs have emotions. So, but certainly Lucy 2 million years ago had some kind of emotions. Over 2 million years, those emotions have been evolving. Those emotions are, they helped us to survive. They are deeply embedded within us, and the minute we're dismissing them, you are too ... You're too suspicious, you're too anxious for this. We're taking all the stuff that evolved that emotion and throwing out the window. And so in the last 10,000 years, and especially in the last 200 years, the world that humans have operated in is just like, it's like changed so quickly that all of that human evolution can't keep up with it. So what happens now is somebody comes up with the emotion of suspicion, which is a highly evolved emotion that evolved over 2 million years. What's in the trees over there? Is it a wild animal? Could it kill me? Is it a competing tribe? Are they friend or foe? You get the feeling, this feeling in the gut. So over the 2 million years, if we were still in our hunter-gatherer state, those emotions would be accurate to what is going on in the rustling of the leaves or whatever the hell else if we talk about suspicion. Then we go into this unbelievably complex world that we live in with writing and all the stuff that we have, social media, and not in all cases can we trust the emotion. There are people who don't trust their emotions at all. There are people who live in their emotions. But if you say something like, you're too suspicious, or you're too anxious, you're cutting that connection between 2 million years of evolution, and you're cutting the informational content of that. And it's very, very hard to translate the informational or the survival content of that into practical action today. And, you know, if I'm faced with a wild beast, it's possible that yelling at the top of my voice because I feel threatened and shaking my hands and jumping up and down is exactly what I need to do to protect myself and my family. But if a guy just bumped into me in the traffic behind and comes out at me and makes threatening noises, for me to jump out and start yelling at him in that way would be, you know, potentially they might be road rage gun, they might shoot me. So the one, it's very obvious that it probably works and it's the right thing to do. And the second, so we have to kind of like switch on other modules which allow us to make that translation, but never lose the profound and powerful informational content of those emotions. So if it's my wife suspicious, I'm a less suspicious person. To say, oh my God, that is really interesting. Let's try and understand what's going on. Now, obviously, that requires my wife to have an open mind and say, she's not like, well, you're just a suspicious bastard. It's like, okay, let's try and, here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm seeing. Did you see the way they ... Did you see that they're not responding? You know, and it goes the other way. I'm an anxious bastard. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, I sent him an email and he didn't respond, you know? Instead of you're always anxious, it's like, well, how many days did you give it? I sent it 2 hours ago. Well, you just remember you don't respond to emails sometimes for 48 hours or more. So, okay, I can calm myself. Emotions are a guide to action. It never serves us to deny our emotions. So, Rumi, the Rumi poem. So Rumi lived in what is now, I believe, present-day Iran, Persian poet, beautiful soul, read a lot in English, so this is translation, but every human being is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And so, when we're talking, I didn't interrupt the poem.
Oh, that was very powerful.
Yeah, you
Wow.
never, it's so like anxiety. If I had Anissa here, like, just invite anxiety and say, hello, anxiety. Would you like to sit down and have a cup of tea? Tell me what's going on with you. Tell me what you're seeing. You don't have to be the anxiety, And so that's a powerful, powerful idea.
Yeah, the inner voice. That was very powerful. Thank you. I am gonna do therapy sessions with myself
Yeah.
in that manner. Because it is very powerful. And even back to the inner voice, something that actually really aligned with the question I wanted to segue to is you said, appreciating the fact that you can say, I'm the man, this is amazing, but at the same time, I really sucked in this aspect, and having that duality and respect both. I heard someone say that the 3 traits of all successful people, morning routines didn't matter. None of it actually mattered. There were only 3 traits, and the one was you felt like you could conquer the world, but you never felt good enough to achieve it. So you delayed gratification in hopes of achieving it.
Yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts on balancing that, because that is, from when I look at like all successful people, there is that torture and that beauty in that, and that doesn't necessarily lead to happiness though. It leads to success, but maybe not happiness. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, what I heard you say, and I'm not sure if this is addressing exactly what, but I think it's valid and relevant, and then if I didn't address it, you can come back and re-ask the question a different way, is so the first word that came to my mind was chutzpah, which is a Jewish origin word, which is kind of the brazenness to Edmund Hillary, the brazenness to think that he can climb Mount Everest. Ernest Shackleton, the brazenness to think that he can reach the Antarctic. But that's combined with the humility or anxiety, or what, the fear of failure, the concern about the downside, and it's when those 2 things come together, and the one doesn't, the brazenness is not lost, but neither is the fear of taking care of the downside. That when those 2 things come together, that's when you get some kind of really powerful results in life, and leads to satisfying outcomes, success, potentially big success, but satisfying success. And if you just concerned about the downside, you'll never take those big steps. But if you only take those big steps with the brazenness, then you could get yourself into some serious trouble. So how do you inculcate? Well, I guess one is to diagnose which one is, and I think that we've all met the big rollers who lead to ruin, Jesse Livermore, and we know plenty of people who go and do things like work as librarians or work as civil servants or all sorts of jobs where there ain't much upside, but there ain't much downside. And I think that's fine. I mean, Philip Larkin, a famous poet, worked as a librarian, I believe, as I think did T.S. Eliot, although I may be mistaken there. And I think they lived really happy lives because their real goal in life was to create great poetry, which they did. As you can see, I'm a kind of a big fan of, not a big fan, but I do love poetry. I've met people, we all will meet people where they they really regret not taking more risk. They lived too much on that side. I think my answer I actually think it's easier to convert from somebody who's extremely risk averse to somebody who takes a little bit more risk in life and creates more possibilities for upsiders, because my word to them is, you don't have to convert from being a hermit living in a very protected environment to going skydiving. Do a small thing, take a small step. Like I said, do a small step. That's okay. If you have that inner voice that says that's ridiculous, don't compare yourself to, it's okay to climb climb the hill to my home. I don't have to be Sir Edmund Hillary climbing Everest. Maybe one day I'll get to Everest, but the first thing I can do is I can walk up the hill. I can walk 5 steps, I can take a flight of steps, something like that. That's actually a better place. And that's easier to work on because your downside in a way is protected through your personality than the other side, which is people who just can't stop themselves from taking big, humongous flying risks on things and live extraordinary highs when it works out, but are in extraordinary pain when it doesn't. Did that address?
Yeah, finding that balance. I'm curious if there's a trait that you would add into the mix of, so there were the 3 successful traits, but what is a trait that you think is missing in that equation that person came up with?
So the 3 traits are?
You feel like you can conquer the world, or it's yours for the taking, so a bit of ego, but you never feel good enough to achieve it, the humbleness or the insecurity, but you're willing to delay gratification in hopes of actually achieving it.
Do you know who wrote that?
I don't. I know who said it, but he never gave up who actually wrote it. A guy named Alex Hermosi on YouTube said that in a podcast, and that was really profound hearing that.
I think that's something that it's a question that I didn't ask myself because I had high anxiety probably, and my life would have been very different if I'd asked this question and taken it seriously. And this is, again, I'm like you, I don't remember the person who asked it first or who I can attribute it to, but what would you do if there was no doubt that you would succeed? What would you dedicate your life to if there's no doubt you would succeed at doing it? And so I can say for me, I came at investing, I think, if I try and understand myself, for partly being an immigrant, partly a family history that I've written about in my annual report of fleeing for reasons of persecution, religious or otherwise. Security was everything, the most important thing. Don't even start to think about all that other stuff until you've found that security. And security, in the way I saw the world, was primarily financial security, period. But I think that question is a wonderful question. So if I had asked myself the question, if you could achieve anything, what would you set your mind to? I might have sought to become a politician, might have sought to become a kind of world-renowned professor maybe. I don't think I would have sought to become I just finished a book by Salman Rushdie, Knife. I don't think I would have sought to become an author of, what is his genre called? It's called magical realism. It's a kind of a wonderful name. 100 Years of Solitude is also considered to be magical realism. Both wonderful, Satanic Verses, what I'm reading right now, which I feel obliged to read. I don't feel obliged to read it. I found my way into the book, and it's not the only one I'm reading, but Salman Rushdie is one of the greatest men walking alive today, given what he's gone through, and he's got my enormous respect and gratitude. But I will never meet him, and I didn't know much about him until recently, but the poor guy was stabbed 18 times over 27 seconds in Chautauqua, New York. Chautauqua, sorry. In any case, I just went off on a tangent there. I think that, you climb a mountain by taking the first step. So just like take the first step.
Taking the first step I think is always the hardest. Right?
I think what I come back at you with is I don't want to talk about qualities because that's not something that's under my control.
Right.
And I want to talk about things that are under my control, and I can't just like create the quality of arrogance or those other qualities that you talked about. What I can do is take an action. So funny enough, we talked about the physical environment shaping our ability to make good decisions. Taking an action shapes your soul. So I've started doing something with my family, with my wife, but my extended family. I learned it from Chantal here. So when my wife leaves on a journey or goes off to the airport in the taxi, I stand at the gate and I salute her. And it's really fascinating. It says, you're really important to me. And my family is really important to me. And I salute you because if you're leaving, then I'm going to stand and give that mark of respect. So on the one hand, it's just a stupid salute. Shapes your soul, shapes who I am, shapes the actions that I subsequently take. And so I'm more interested in what actions can I take that will shape my soul, that will shape my, and maybe shaping my soul is a bit much, but I think it does ultimately shape your soul. Again, Warren's got all the wisdom, but this actually doesn't originate with Warren. There's a beautiful set of, watch your actions because they become deeds, watch your deeds because they become habits, watch your habits because they become character, watch your character because it becomes destiny. So, this is a theme that this action, how's it going to, ultimately that's destiny. The book by the famous US general who said, making your bed in the morning is destiny. Why? You make your bed, you've achieved something, you feel you've accomplished, you feel a sense of mastery, so what actions can I take that ultimately will affect my destiny? And actually, amazing enough, standing there and saluting my wife ultimately becomes destiny. It's just kind of nuts. It's those small actions, just incredible. Small actions taken repeatedly. The bonds of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. Something like that is, I think, what Warren said. It's everything.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is so profound. I mean, even just thinking about it and trying to navigate that paradox of all the little things matter, but then at the end of the day, the things that truly matter can also be refined to simple steps taken.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to just speak to you about was a Jewish proverb that I actually really resonated with. I'm curious your thoughts on this, about just moving all the complexities away from life and getting to the root. And the closest one can get to immortality, as they say, is plant a tree, have a kid, write a book. And I just that, to me, talking about success is just so everything you need. And we also talked about William Green's book, Richer, Wiser, Happier.
Yeah, it's a nice tripartite division.
3 words. It says everything. And even that proverb, plant a tree, write a book, have a kid, says everything about life. And I'm curious your thoughts on how much of life is us just really overcomplicating things when it is right in front of us. When you hear something like that.
The world is complicated. So we live in a very complicated world. We live in a world that's been made more complicated by, developments of the last 200, between, last 10,200, whatever time scale you want to make. So it's not our fault. I mean, we grow up in different circumstances. We get given brains that are different. We get brains, many of us, that might have been suited to hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but not particularly suited to modern life. Or there's one aspect of our brains that is not suited to modern life, and we have to master. And then over and above that, some of us are born with real physical handicaps. Some of them are mental handicaps. It might be, neurodiversity. It might be low IQ. And then we have the social circumstances we grow up in. We might have had abusive parents. We might have had an abusive relationship. I met a woman, a young lady at the Berkshire meeting. It's public knowledge, I won't mention her name, who was repeatedly raped by a friend of her older brother from age 13 to 15. So some poor people were born in Gaza, and they didn't ask to be born in Gaza. You know, I won the ovarian lottery. I wasn't born in Gaza, period. That's so yeah, plenty of reasons why life's not simple. And so what comes up for me is, you know, so how fortunate have I been? I was born, you know, I was born with a good IQ. I was born in a stable home. My parents still married. I was born in financial plenty. I was born in a part of the world where I could get a good education. You could go on and on. And over above that, I've been lucky enough to sort of like, you know, I don't think I've done the best I possibly can, but I've evolved myself to straighten myself out. So there are definitely kinks and flaws that I've been able to straighten out for myself. One should never confuse winning a lottery ticket with ability. And so, yeah, there's some ability, and it's fun to try and focus on it and try and squeeze out lessons, but let's not deny the extraordinary lottery tickets that I've drawn in life. I mean, I can count so many lottery tickets that I've just given you. Yeah, so the very end bit, I've managed to straighten myself out a little bit, done some therapy, done some Anthony Robbins, you know, but how many things was I just given? You know, and I gave my children a new perspective on this when I said, you know, so one of my children says, yeah, well, I'm really smart and I deserve ... It's like, oh, you think you own your intelligence, you know? You just inherited that. You did nothing. You just got it, just like that, you know? Because some combination of genes, environment, nutrition, whatever else, created the brain. You didn't do anything to get that. It was like, holy shit. Yeah, that's a lottery ticket winner. And the world is full of the biographies and autobiographies, especially autobiographies, are full of, I think that Charlie Munger maybe calls it misattribution error. Let me tell you how I did so great in business. No, you're a lottery ticket winner. You know, that was one of the great benefits for me of reading Nassim Taleb's book, Fooled by Randomness. Yeah, Fooled by Randomness. I didn't think how many people, you know, he calls places like New York Extremistan. So many lottery winners in New York. And so you need to, first of all, realize that they're lottery winners. And second of all, you need to understand that they don't realize that they're lottery winners and may never realize. And in a way, many, many people who are living extraordinary, fortunate, and successful lives are not sure themselves. Is this the result of my hard work, or am I just extraordinarily lucky? I think that the longer life is, the more you work, you know, the more you can tell about some people that it's not luck, it's their effort. I think I can say that about Warren Buffett. I think that there are aspects of my life that I can say, no, that life that you have, Guy, you were extraordinarily fortunate, you are extraordinarily fortunate, but there's, you know, and I appreciate you coming to the office and talking to me about it, because in a way you're saying, no, there's effort there, decisions you've made, things that you've learned that have helped you to become very fortunate. But I think there's a very long and roundabout way of saying it. Don't forget the lottery ticket aspect. Don't forget. Be careful of always that people may be there to, I mean, so I'll give you another example of this, which is kind of fun. The case method at Harvard Business School, you know. So you go and you know, 20 years ago, the cases were Procter & Gamble, General Electric, you know, Unilever, that was it. You know, then 10 years ago, the cases were all Apple, Google, Microsoft. And each time, that's the model of success. But actually, they're not teaching you what the next thing is. They're just reinforcing what these companies did to become successful. Those companies, in a way, are lottery winners, because you can't recreate those conditions to make it happen again. How useful is that knowledge? Is Harvard Business School and the case writing method, is it about studying best practice, or is it just promoting the most successful, powerful companies of the day? Not, I'm making a very grand generalization and grand claims without really backing them up. But I'm just asking the question. And I think that there's enough doubt. Harvard Business School would like to claim it's all about studying the best. It's probably complex. There's a lot of that. But is there an element that you're actually just promoting the lottery ticket winners? There's also an element of that.
I heard that they did a class teaching on Taylor Swift, her success. And when I heard that, I thought, how much is she a pure anomaly in society? And to teach a class on that, I found was kind of strange.
And it depends on the way the class is taught, I would imagine, because if I had to teach that class, I think that I would say, we're going to study Taylor Swift. She's a total anomaly. But let's see what we can learn from anomalies. Is there anything that we can learn? And it may be that there are things that we can learn. That's why the world is complicated. A blustery, big-headed business person, Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. There are probably things that you can learn from that, even though he didn't, turns out, write the book. But, so it's complicated. We can learn from Taylor Swift, even if she's an anomaly, probably. Or can we? I'm not entirely sure. Yes, no doubt we can. And no doubt that we can. So, yeah.
I have two final questions for you. This one is one that I myself probably need to work on the most, and I'm sure a lot of the audience as well, especially your portion who are aspiring to be successful in their own endeavors, is the trap of desire. And Naval Ravikant, one of my favorite
it's amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah, and his book, audiobook, where he says, desire is a contract with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. And so in the investing community, everyone's desire is to generate a specific rate of return for 20, 30 years. And we're willing to sign that contract to be unhappy until we get what we want. And so I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts. One, how do you navigate desire, especially with how dangerous it can be? And two, what is your advice for people who think that how to pick a desire per se?
Yeah, so I suspect desire is, I haven't thought that much about desire. Desire is an emotion. So I'm not sure we can pick an emotion. The emotions well up inside of us. So I think it's more a question of ride that bucking horse. How do you manage that emotion? How do you steer it? How do you find its evolutionary how do we translate this evolutionary thing that we've got inside of us into something that is functional and productive for us today? And if I'm thinking extemporaneously, but desire, obviously the first place is sexual reproduction, and we desire what is fecund, what is going to help us to reproduce the species. That clearly goes straight to the evolutionary framework, because we need to propagate our genes, and what we find desirable are the things that will help propagate life to the next generation, including women who are fertile and men who are strong, and all of those things depending on which sex we are. And when you're married, that especially if you're early in your marriage, that desire doesn't go away. And if you're male, my experience is that desire can be for women who you're not married to, and then it needs to be managed and channeled, because maybe in hunter-gatherer groups it was okay to have to be polygamous in some way. That doesn't work today. So there's desire. I think that, and if we just stick with that for a second, because I think that that's where it's at its core. The first thing is just to confront it and describe it accurately, and just see it for what it is and to understand it. So don't deny it. See it's there, and then try and understand what to do about it. In the same way we were talking about, don't live in your anxiety. You are not your anxiety. That's something different to you. That, by the way, meditation helps a lot with as well. You are not your desire. That is a thing that's coming up for you. It's not who you are. Invite it in, have a conversation with it. Don't let it lead you down the garden path. So many men especially have ruined beautiful families and marriages because they thought they were the desire and they weren't.
I think about what William said about that, of all the investors who are divorced multiple times for various reasons, whether they chose their desire to be 150% in their investing pursuit, but maybe not 70% in multiple aspects of their life, like relationships.
So what I said in my letter in discussion with William, as a result of discussion with William, was, I don't want to run my life in such a way that out of all, divide myself into 1,000 people, 1,000 different ways the world can unfold. I want to run my life in such a way that I'm successful in all of those possible worlds, not just in some of those possible worlds. And what it led me to was, you bring up the example, the guy who makes an extra, buck, but destroys his marriage, has kind of like created a world which is not the optimal world. It would have been better to make 1 billion less or 1 million less or whatever it is and remain in that happy marriage. So it's really fascinating for me, and it's something I struggle with a lot. I know what the right answer is. And I kind of, my last annual letter kind of describes it and describes the decisions I've taken around it. There's absolutely no doubt that having more financial wealth is not going to make me happier. So the pursuit of more financial wealth cannot be my goal. The goal has to be something different. And so that desire does not exist for me. I don't think it exists for Warren Buffett either. I think that, a better desire, and maybe this is like to be the best version of myself that I can be, I think is an extremely powerful idea. How do I become the best version of myself? What steps do I need to take to achieve that? Another perspective change for me was, I think it's Wait But Why, that wonderful guy. I think that, he divided his life into how many weeks he's got left, how many seconds he's got left. And actually, we're all far richer than Warren Buffett in terms of seconds of our life or days of our life left. We got far more. If Monish at one point, I don't know if he agrees with it now, said that he would happily swap his life for Warren's. I'm like, no way, Warren's at the end of his life. I'm still in the middle of my life. I would much rather have my life than Warren's life. Not because Warren has not had an extraordinary, wonderful life, but because I would also say Viktor Frankl, what we can suffer anyhow if we have our why. I think he said that. Beauty, appreciation of beauty is one of them. Appreciation of the beauty of mathematics, of nature, of mountains, of my children, so that is and the beauty of building a good business, to have great investments, have wonderful relationships with the people in those investments. I get really motivated. I get super excited. I have no idea. There's certainly a significant chance of failing in this, but I'm invested in an Indian rating agency called Care Ratings, and it's not the leading agency. It's a homegrown agency, and have you heard me talk about this? And those guys, I'd like to be a part of the story that brings that agency to a whole new level, to a place where perhaps that agency broke the oligopoly of the existing agencies and sovereign ratings, where that actually changes the structure of the capital markets, where bonds rating is not just happening out of New York and London, but it also happens out of Delhi and Bombay. I think that would be an amazing thing. And yeah, I'll make a shitload of money from myself and my investors by doing that, if that were to happen. But and the money is the measure, but it's not the goal. And I don't have the desire. So another perspective change. So how many seconds do you have left? What is the content of those seconds? It's not the years to your life, it's the life to your years. You know, I don't need to ever own a big fancy yacht, but I'd very much like it if my friends own some big fancy yachts and they invite me onto their big fancy yachts. That would be just fine. So, you know, that kind of perspective change, it's the quality of your relationships, not how much money you have in the bank. Another perspective change is the desire not for financial wealth, but the desire for an ample, you know, balance sheet when you take into account all the different kinds of wealth that you have: financial, psychological, social, you know, all of those things. So, you know, you need to be valued and respected in society. You need to be valued and loved by your family, you know. And yes, it's nice to have money in the bank to pay the bills, but to have money in the bank to pay the bills and nobody likes or respects you is not a great life, or to have a family that doesn't love you. So I don't have desire for the highest returns. And as we've established, it would be asinine to have the highest returns if they came at any risk of those other things, you know. One of the many reasons why Warren Buffett's such an unusual person, and I think will go down in history as being this unusual person, is that his pursuit of those things, being loved by society, being loved by his family, combines in his personality to make him one of the wealthiest guys on the planet and to have some of the highest returns on the planet. But one of the key things I learned at that lunch, and I realized it's sort of like 2/3 of the way through, was that he wasn't trying to be the richest guy. He was just doing what naturally made him the happiest, or is doing what naturally makes him the happiest. And that happiness is way more important. It's everything, actually. So I don't have the desire to have the highest returns. I have the desire to live the fullest, richest life, to have the most life to my years, not the years to my life. Which is why, you know, at the Zurich project, I'll be taking a group of people swimming. You know, I hope to learn a lot about investing, but it'd be nice to have a good swim in the lake, you know?
Yeah. No, I think, yeah, I think this is what makes me gravitate so much towards you in this community, Warren Buffett, because, I mean, yeah, the most interesting thing is the money is just a vehicle for playing the game of how to constantly recreate yourself, innovate on yourself, and pursue, you know, and so, yeah, I love the conversations, how, yeah, asking the money questions are the least interesting, in my opinion. But as a final question, I do have to ask one money question for the audience, because unfortunately, it breaks my heart that this will get the most views. But
we're all about views. I'm a social media slut, let's face it.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the understanding the psychology and trying to live a beautiful life is, yeah, I hope everyone has just been profoundly impacted by what you've just said to me, and everyone watching. But for everyone who does want you to answer this, if you were starting with $1 million today, what would you be doing differently? Someone asked Warren Buffett that at the Berkshire meeting. I'm curious what your answer would be.
Differently to what I'm doing now?
Yeah. If you were starting just with $1 million of your own money or capital you've raised.
So if it's $1 million, the first thing for me is that I'm getting a job as well. So I'm doing it part-time because I want to preserve that $1 million for investing, and I don't want to draw down on it for living. So I'm getting a job, and I'm paying all of my living expenses from my job, and I'm going to try and find a job that pays my living expenses and allows me to invest. So I don't want to pay my life expenses out of the returns, and that part of that is just take the pressure off. I know that all I need to do is compound that capital, $1 million, at any rate of return. But if I'm living, on $60,000 a year, then I'm drawing down. I don't want to be forced to have to make a 6% return just to stay even, say. So, and obviously, given the way I live now, if that were the case, I'd have to massively cut expenses. I have 3 children going through college, all sorts of expenses. So now we just talk about the investing. I've sorted out my life expenses part of it. And pay down debt, don't have any debt, pay down the mortgage, get rid of that. So really be able to just invest. I think that what then I would do differently to what I did and what I'm doing today is I would want to take higher risks with my investing if I'm starting. So it depends what age I am.
Let's say you're under 30.
Yeah, so I think I want to divide that million into at least 10 buckets, but it might be as many as 20 buckets. And I'm going to take, hopefully, so I'm going to try and make bets where none of them can turn out as a complete loss, but they all have a high enough probability of returning multiples of my money. And I'm going to, and the key is to divide it into the pots, to enough pots that I can keep going, that I'm not going to give up, that I'm not going to get scared. And if I've got big brass balls like Monish Pabrai, I may only need 3 or 4 pots. But even Monish went to 10 by 10, so he was talking about 10%. I think that for me it's 20%, and so I've got to keep making those bets. And I'm not sure how many pots, because I think that I need to make those bets over a 5-year period minimum. So maybe it's 2 bets a year, and then it's 10 bets. So so that is actually 10% each time. So I'm drawing down on the $1 million.
Would you be flipping through Value Line? Would you be?
Oh, I see.
But to find 2 bets a year, would you be digging through the weeds?
So everybody has their own journey and their own story, and it's important to own that journey and story and not to regret that it's not a different story. In my story, I had enormous fears of losing money, losing the confidence of my first investor, who was my father. And so I had some bets like that worked out enormously, but I just didn't put very much money into them. An example was Duff and Phelps, where given the amount of money I was managing, I ought to have put $1 million in. I was managing about 10, and instead I put 200,000, and that $1 million would have turned into $7 million. Instead, 200,000 turned into 1.4. Still not a terrible result, but I didn't invest enough. So I was all the way through the life of the fund. I've had shares of Nestle. Nestle is a wonderful company, isn't going anywhere, but it's not going to get you 7x in 3 years or 2 years or whatever it was that it was in Duff and Phelps. So if I was starting in my 30s and was doing it again, I would have way more of those. And if you take the scenario where my job is covered, yeah, each one of those bets is a Duff and Phelps types bet. I'm putting 5 to 10% of the net worth. You talked about $1 million into that. And where am I looking? If you want to find ideas that are going to be, 7x your money in that period of time, you're looking at sub-billion-dollar market cap companies. On the whole, it's far less likely to happen. So where am I going? I'm flipping through Value Line. I'm looking at Value Investors Club, Seeking Alpha. I'm going to things like the Zurich Project. I'm going to ValueX. I'm going to the Berkshire meeting. I'm talking through best ideas. I'm trying to develop a network with people who have good ideas. I'm running screens. But all of that, I love this. So this came up in the recent podcast that Monish Pabrai had with Shan Puri, who said, an idea is like an asshole. Everybody's got one. So ideas are like an asshole. Everybody's got one. At the end of the day, so it's not hard to come across the ideas. So the thing is, at some point, One has to actually say, okay, I'm going to commit now. And it's going to be in an uncertain environment. You're not going to see green. You're going to see amber. It's not going to be perfect. So that's a kind of like level of risk taking that in the past I was uncomfortable with. Because of this ergodicity stuff, I want to go with things that are far surer bets. I'm trying to find something that's a 7x and also is a sure bet. Every now and then those will come up. But I'm going to take things where it's not a sure bet, but it's still a potential 7x, and I actually have to move to, and then where I find them is constantly going to be changing. But I need to try all sorts of different avenues. I was reading recently a wonderful piece of research that was produced 4 or 5 years ago where they looked at companies, and I can share with you the research that had done sort of like 100 baggers or 50 baggers. And they looked at where those ideas came from, and they show that there was a kind of a skew, for example, to the countries where those companies existed. And funnily enough, there were, the countries, like the Scandinavian countries, score quite highly in that category. And it's surprising because it's a social welfare state with high taxes and things. Exact reason for that, who knows? But it might be, it turned out that the AIM market in the UK had a pretty high number of those companies. So maybe I'm saying, look at AIM companies. Maybe I'm looking at small caps. Maybe I'm like finding what works. But at some point, you've got to make a move, Mm-hmm. And Warren calls them wrinkles. So yeah, I'd be doing more of those wrinkles. And I would have been developing the muscle the muscle in me, for all sorts of reasons, is not as well developed as it could be, of being willing to look at wrinkles, things where there's something going on, special situations, that makes it an unusual valuation and a very good likelihood of a very, very high return, but where there's also some hair on it. And, that's a muscle that you can strengthen. That muscle is far stronger in Monish than it is in me. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. Partly it's temperament in Monish. Partly it's a very unusual childhood that Monish had. Monish's father was an entrepreneur who went bankrupt many times. Monish has told that story a few times. And Monish learned that was okay. He's not afraid of those kinds of high risks and potential losses, and that's what gives him an unusual orientation towards risk, which I don't have. And so I would be working hard to strengthen that muscle at a younger age. Yeah, that's what I'd be doing with $1 million.
Thank you so much.
Well, I sort of come back on myself and say, you look at my last letter to investors, the most important thing, survival is everything. So I think in all of that, I'm at the same time, so I want to optimize that better. I think what I'm trying to say is that if I look at what I did, for understandable reasons, I was way more risk averse and conservative than I should have been. And that's okay. I forgive myself. I think that I should have been willing to turn that dial up in the ways that I've described, but with the constraint of never risking going out of business. And I would say that when Warren gets asked that question, he's so confident at that, yeah. But and probably Warren is right to be confident, but for every Warren, there's probably 1 million people who are not right to be confident. And so, what's the probability that I'm Warren? What's the probability that I'm not? There's a far higher likelihood that I'm not Warren. So even if I think that I'm going to be successful, assume you're not, And forgive me, I'm just sort of like, I'm adding length to this. I hope that's positive, not negative.
It's a positive.
So the intern I've got right now, Shmuel, he enjoyed this. It's like, assume God is watching you. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not, God is wired into our genes. Most humans evolved with some idea, conception of some kind of God. So if you don't believe in God, it's not a problem. Just activate that part of your genetic makeup that believes that there is a God. We all have that. You can be an atheist and do this. And now God is watching me. And if I invest in that thing, God is going to make it go down by 50%. Only if I invest in it. If I don't invest in it, it's going to go straight up to the moon. But the minute he sees that I invested in it, it's going to go down by 50%, at least. Because God is going to say, well, are you serious? Did you really want to invest in that? Show me how serious you were, Assume God's going to do that to you on every investment, And then there's another thing, which is that every risk that I don't investigate is the one that God's going to make show up in the... So if I, it's kind of like the uncertainty principle. It's like, if I investigate it, it won't show up and it will turn out to have been useless. But if I don't investigate it, God will dafka, is the Hebrew expression, will just to be that way, will make it show up. So assume that. And so one of the reasons why I love maths, after this I'm going to dinner with mathematicians, it's like the square root of minus 1. So fascinating. For the longest time, there were mathematicians who were like, that doesn't exist, and we don't do maths with the square root of negative 1. For a certain period of time, there were mathematicians who didn't accept the existence of negative numbers. How could there be negative numbers? You either had objects or there weren't any. A minus 1, until they finally accepted the number line. So I find it fascinating that those ideas about God watching me is extremely powerful. And you don't have to believe God exists for that idea to be powerful and to affect action. So, yeah, but it's fun to talk to you. I hope that I've been helpful. I just find myself blathering on.
No, very helpful.
We'll find out by the number of video views. That's how we'll find out.
That's true. Yes, especially the last part there in that question. Yeah, people come for the gossip on what would you do with $1 million, but we're going to keep them by having the here's what actually matters, hopefully, in life. So thank you so much, Guy. It's really been a pleasure.
I've been looking forward to hosting in my office for a very long time. And so ever since you came out of the woodworks, I don't know, about 3 years ago maybe, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. And it's been really fun for me to be at a place in my life where I'm, you're a highly selected person. So I didn't walk out on the street and pick up a Jeremy Stickney. Jeremy Stickney sent me an email. You identified me. You sent me a message. Was it on Twitter?
No, just email.
It was an email.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. But I did Jeremy told me about a little bit about what you'd worked on. I was like, wow, I've never met a guy like that. The only guy I know, or one other, it's not the only one, connection like that is Syed Balki, who sent me a message on Twitter. And I in your case, I looked to see the podcast that you'd worked on, and I was like, oh my God, how many subscriptions was it at the time?
At the time, 3 million. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, my God, I've never talked to a guy with 3 million. So, and in this case, Syed gets in touch with me, and I look and I see, my God, he's got 100,000 followers. So I messaged him back within a week. We were talking on the phone. Within 2 weeks, I introduced him to Monish Pabrai. And he's now part of our lattice work group. It's quite incredible. So, yeah.
Well, I am deeply honored and to be a part of this community,
Yeah.
I will say.
Well,
it holds me accountable too, which God is watching me, but also you guys are watching me. And I really,
Yeah, so what I'd say, so then, we did a podcast together. It was one of the most popular episodes that I'd done. I appeared on, I'm blanking on his name.
Evan Carmichael.
On Evan Carmichael's show. And then I invited you to ValueX and you came, and Jeremy gave a presentation on the power of YouTube. And, I'd already learned some of this stuff, but it was good to hear it again. And I think that they asked you to do a deep dive on it.
The first time, yes.
Yeah, so Jeremy then does a deep dive. So we get votes. You get voted back to do a deep dive if people really like your talk and want to learn more. And so now you have deep network and friendships across the ValueX community. And in a way, that's God smiling at you. So you don't have to believe in God to understand this idea of God smiling. So what I believe is, when you make a decision, when I make an uncertain decision, then we get a sense of whether it was a good one or not. Because if it was a good decision, things start showing up, So I invited Jeremy to, I'm looking at the camera, I invited you to ValueX, and I didn't know what would happen, but now I understand that you're developing a podcast with, I don't want to mention names unless I'm allowed to, but some pretty impressive people. And so you're deepening your relationship and all sorts of good things are happening, which is just so much fun.
I'm very grateful for you Yeah,
Oh, and
welcoming.
wait, and you were at the dinner at the Berkshire meeting
Mm-hmm.
this year and last year?
This year.
This year, not the year before?
No, it was my
Oh,
first time
damn.
at Berkshire,
Oh,
actually.
Jeremy, the previous dinner, we had Debbie Basanik. You could have met Debbie Basanik, but that's okay. I think she'll be back at my dinner next year or so. But yeah, there was a good crowd of people there. It was fun.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to just make it a routine now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because we never talked about it, but so one of the huge shaping factors in my life is the simple decision I made 25 years ago or so more to just attend the Berkshire meeting every year. You know, attend the Berkshire meeting, be at the South Door at 6 a.m., meet the people there, and it's shaped my life. It's incredible. Simple decision, you know, it's shaping your life.
Playing long-term games.
Yeah.
To wrap it all around. Ergodicity.
Yeah, and Luca Delana's latest book is about playing long-term games.
I should
Wonderful.
read that.
Yeah, you'll love it. You got a summary of it in his talk. Were you at his talk?
Yeah, that was my favorite talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.